Priti Patel.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. But I actually just want to thank those members that are here today and my honourable friend, the member for Wellingborough, for being such a stalwart and a champion of everything to do with human trafficking. And, of course, I do remember the day when my honourable friend was elected as chair of the APPG. And, you know, notwithstanding that, I say that because his reaction and the comments that he made about someone of right political views, therefore working with others, really shows that there is no divide on this issue and we are here to build bridges. And I have to say, I think, Ms Betts, collectively, there's so much experience in this room as well of people that have fought for victims. And today's debate is timely because while I appreciate there have been references to the illegal migration bill, of course, we are going to see the introduction of the victims bill today in Parliament, which is something that I have been campaigning for many years, and I'll touch on that. But importantly, I'm standing alongside many of those who've stood up in a compassionate way for victims of some of the most appalling and abhorrent crimes for decades. My honourable friend for Wellingborough has made an outstanding speech and actually unpacked many of the complex issues, too complex and sometimes conflated issues that are associated with human trafficking. Our priority must always be the victims, but dismantling human trafficking criminal networks while tackling modern-day slavery and supporting victims is where I'd like to focus my remarks. And some of this also touches on my time in government, most recently in the Home Office, but also in international development as well. And many colleagues will know some of the work that we have collectively worked on and done and achieved in the past. But taking action on human trafficking and modern-day slavery, both at home, which is incredibly important, as well as abroad, were always issues that require continued focus. And this debate has already exposed, Mr Betts, the fact that there's ongoing legislation in this House. There'll be future legislation coming in this House as well. But this is both a domestic issue and an international issue. I will give way, of course.
I'm very grateful for the point that she's making. And would she share my concern that the fact that modern slavery has become part of the debate on the migration bill before us, that we're actually forgetting some of the most vulnerable victims in our society right now? And I particularly like to highlight cuckooing of people with learning disabilities.
Exactly.
And that's, people with learning disabilities are perhaps the most discriminated community within our society. And it really, if we let this debate continue to be seen through the prism of migration, we are going to be letting down the most vulnerable.
So my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I should just, if I may, Chair, just reflect on the fact, of course, in her own constituency, when I was Home Secretary, we saw the most appalling act of people being facilitated through a lorry, and that was a Purfleet incident where 39 individuals, victims, passed away through what was one of the most horrific incidences. But we had very strong criminal prosecutions and work that took place, and I will want to come on to that in a minute. But specifically to her point as well, cuckooing, children being exploited through drug gangs, vulnerable people, this has absolutely dominated certainly much of my work over 3.5 years. But fundamentally there is a link here, and that of course is criminal gangs showing contempt and a disregard for human life and dignity. And this is a tragedy. This, I'm afraid, is a big tragedy that we are all here discussing today. And the latest figures from the ILO estimate that in 2021 there were 28 million people forced into labour and 22 million forced into marriages worldwide. These issues are more prevalent than ever today, despite the fact that we think the world has moved on and society has moved on and there is greater awareness. In total, that's 50 million. That 50 million is more than the population of Spain. So I think we should just think about the scale and the challenge that we face. They also estimated that between 2016 and 2021, that number had increased by 10 million. So this demonstrates the nature of criminality, which has been touched on by my honourable friend from Wellingborough. But that is why we have to be relentless. And there is one thing here, and I really recognise, obviously, the Home Office footprint in this as well, and that we do need an anti-slavery commissioner, and there are reasons as to why this was delayed last year, mainly down to the changes in government that took place more than once. But the reality is this should be a whole-of-government effort. And, of course, that is why the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, who deserves every credit and every tribute for the work that she led on securing that modern-day slavery act, it was so fundamental because she recognised that. And in fact, during my time in DFID, we worked internationally, and I had the privilege of working with the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead as Prime Minister at the time, to develop that call to action to end forced labour, modern slavery, human trafficking, and that went straight under her leadership to the United Nations General Assembly in 2017. And the impact of that was so significant, and that was a major moment for the United Kingdom and one we should be proud of. It brought together 37 countries, introduced commitments to strengthen law enforcement activity, galvanise international cooperation and support victims. And of course, rightly, we funded that and we put aid into this. And alongside that, that investment helped to tackle modern-day slavery upstream in other countries, in transit countries, tackling trafficking at source. And it absolutely shows how development assistance safeguards people and safeguards people's lives. But I'm afraid to say, Mr. Betts, we have seen over recent years, because this is no longer integrated in the way in which it once was, we have gone backwards. And with that, of course, our international standing on this very issue has also regressed. And sadly, I do think this is right. I mean, there are many issues around illegal migration that rightly need to be tackled, and the government has to find all the right ways in doing that. But that is why, through the National Anti-Borders Act last year, we brought in temporary protection measures, because it's right that we give the care and support to victims, genuine victims. And it was actually down to honourable colleagues who spent time with me as Home Secretary, including the member for Chingford and Woodford Green, Wellingborough and others, that made this case, and I did work with the Centre for Social Justice on this, and of course the various commissioners made this point very, very clearly. So I think in the interest of time, Mr. Betts, there are two quick points that I just want to make. We must clearly work comprehensively and thoroughly to bring offenders to face justice. And I'm afraid our laws are just too weak on this. They really are. The level of prosecutions, even in National Anti-Borders Act last year, there was a very targeted measure to ensure that small boat pilots in particular would have some focus in terms of being prosecuted, obviously through the right way. But of course, our National Crime Agency, which my honourable friend from Wellingborough has mentioned, they deserve great credit because the work that they do upstream, much of it is based on security and intelligence information, cannot be disclosed but can be disclosed in courts and for prosecution purposes. Their work in this country must be reinforced and it must be bolstered at every single level. My last point is very much about supporting the victims. And they are victims of horrendous and heinous crimes. I'm delighted the Victims Bill will come forward today. I've been going on about it for over a decade. But this is where I think, collectively, we must work together to ensure that the victims of human trafficking and modern-day slavery are given support in the criminal justice system, and that the laws are strengthened to ensure that the prosecutions take place. My honourable friend, the member for Wellingborough, highlighted the derisory figures, quite frankly, on sentences and prosecutions. We must change that, and I believe this House can do this. The other area to touch on for victims is statutory services. Care for adults, we know, is good, but the approach for children, we have institutional state failure, I'm afraid to say, where local authorities are allowing children to abscond. It then becomes a policing issue. It should not just be about the police. I'm afraid our statutory services must step up. Mental health services, housing services, trauma-informed approaches must be embedded. And just to conclude, Mr. Betts, I know that the Minister has been working assiduously on this, but I think we must now start to hear further details in terms of what work is taking place across government to really ensure that victims are given the support and the reforms that are required to give them justice are brought forward. Thank you.